south. We believe that we live in a Europe of deep inequality, a Europe of massive corporate influence and corporate capture, a Europe of climate destruction, and a Europe of increasing racism, hatred, division spread by the far right, and a Europe of militarisation and war. That's the sort of Europe that we are opposed to. We think voters in the European elections should take the opportunity to elect a strong team of eco-socialists to go to the European Parliament and be a voice and be campaigners there for the kind of change we want to see in this country and across Europe, fighting for a Europe that serves the interests of people, not of profit, fighting against the sort of militarisation policies encapsulated by Ursula von der Leyen, an unelected leader of the European Union, giving a green light to Israel's genocide in Gaza, combating the rise of the far right, arguing for investment in housing in this country, and arguing for a very, very different democratic Europe that serves the needs of the people based on solidarity and so on. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Brian O'Boyle, who's going to introduce us. We'll just take brief statements from each of the candidates and then take questions. So over to you, Brian.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Yeah, over the last 40 years or so, it's become obvious that the European Union is a rigged game. So I'm running in the election in order to highlight the fact that for the vast majority of people now, for the last 40 years, but particularly since the Great Recession and even speeding up since COVID, the vast wealth that is created in Europe is going to the top 1% of the population. It's causing massive misery, anxiety. It's causing so many people to feel like they are being left behind by the system, and I think it's important that we have politicians, people, activists actually, who are going to stand for a different kind of Europe. So, I mean, you know, if you look at this, there's report after report now about, as Paul says, corporate capture. And one I would reference would be the Oxfam report that was out this week that basically said two things that are shocking. One is that the top two wealthiest people in Ireland, I presume they're men, have as much of Ireland's wealth as the bottom half of the population. And then more structurally, over the last 3 years, since the cost of living crisis for most people, 63% or 2/3 of all the wealth that was created in the world has gone to 1% of the population, while 90% of people have had to make do with 10%, right? So that is fundamentally anti-democratic. You can't have an ongoing democratic society if you have that level of inequality of wealth, influence and power, and I think we have to stand against that. And you know, it's worth saying that behind those statistics are real human lives. I had a quick look. 1 in 5 kids are going to school hungry in this country, right? So it's vast wealth, but 1 in 5 kids going to school hungry. 24% of single parents are in deprivation. Tens of thousands of pensioners can't afford to heat their homes, right? So this is not just statistics, it's real human lives that we're trying to highlight and argue for. And in the end, you know, if we want democracy, we need to fight for that. And if we want to have a society based on solidarity and empathy, then I think the election is a place for us to stand for those values and against the ideas of the far right, for example, who take the genuine anger and concern of people and misdirect it against other vulnerable people. So we'll be determined to make sure that we write the record on who actually causes the misery in this world. And it's not refugees, it's the 1% at the top of society.
Thanks, Brian. Over. Just to mention before we go to Cian that Brian is a long-time socialist activist, a former national organiser of People Before Profit. He is an economist and a lecturer at the Atlantic Technological University in Sligo. He's written a number of books, most recently a book on tax haven Ireland, which exposes the role of Ireland as a tax haven. He chaired the Right to Water campaign in Sligo. He's currently part of the organising committee of the Sligo Palestine Solidarity campaign. So next up is Cian Prentival, who is going to be standing in Ireland South. Cian is a former councillor in Limerick City. He is also a long-time socialist activist. In 2016, he came within 300 votes of winning a seat in the general election, and has recently been an activist and organiser with Raise the Roof, the Ireland-Palestine Solidarity Campaign, as well as, of course, in People Before Profit.
Yeah, so 10 years ago I stood for Limerick City Council on the pledge of building mass movements against the water charges and supporting the campaign for repeal. And we fought those battles and we won. But what we've had since is 10 years of since the so-called end of austerity, 10 years of so-called growth, and the only thing that's really grown has been the waiting lists, rents for ordinary people and profits for the super rich. I saw a figure today, over 650 people on trolleys in our hospitals today, and out of curiosity, I went back to see what it was this day 10 years ago, and it was about 240. So those on waiting lists have doubled in the past 10 years of so-called growth, in the 10 years since the so-called end of austerity. And I took the decision to once again stand for election, because I try to live by the principle that if you can't stand the news, you better try to change the news. And that's what we did 10 years ago with the anti-water charges and the repeal movements. We not just changed the news, but we changed history. People engaged in mass movements and built people power campaigns that changed history. And I feel that's what we need to do again today. I live in Garryowen, working class community, in a working class city in Limerick. And I feel it in my bones every day that working class people are angry. They are pissed off. They have had 10 years where the headlines say that things are meant to be getting better, but where in reality there's been a slow decline in our services, in our living standards, in our quality of life. And that is making people feel very, very pissed off. And they're looking for change. And now you have a far right who, let's be clear, when there was the real... I'm doubling up. Let's be clear, we have a far right who, when there was the actual battles were on against austerity, these far right politicians were supporting Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. The Healy-Raes, Maddy McGrath, Richard O'Donoghue, who I was served on Limerick Council with, when push came to shove, they were backing up the establishment. Jackie Healy-Rae and Maddy McGrath supported the Fianna Fáil Green government that bailed out the banks, that brought us into the Troika austerity. But now what they're trying to do is whip up hatred and kick downwards, blaming people poorer, more vulnerable than us, going after immigrants, going after LGBT people, going after travellers, and going after the unemployed. And what we're trying to build is channel that legitimate, genuine anger that exists in working class communities, but channel it towards those who are really in control, the billionaires, as Brian said. Two individuals, just think about that for a second, it's just crazy that there's two individuals over here who own more wealth than the majority of Irish people combined. That two people have more power, more wealth, more influence in that sense than the majority. How can you have genuine democracy in that situation? But you don't see the far right protesting about those billionaires. In fact, they're welcoming the likes of Musk and their billionaire friends. You know what I mean? So what we want to do is rekindle that spirit of political revolution, that working class revolt for decent quality of life, and channel it against the ones that are really to blame, the billionaires and millionaires that run this society, and the politicians whose strings they pull. So that's why I'm standing to try to build that kind of people power movement again on housing, on Palestine, on climate, and against the rule of the billionaires and against the far right snake oil sales for people.
Thanks very much, Cian. Okay, next we go to Breed, who does not need much introduction, obviously has a very long history, no offence Breed, of standing for working class people. In the recent period of time from 2016 being a TD for Dublin South Central, prior to that being a councillor and Dublin City Councillor, but prior to that for a long time being a socialist activist and a trade union activist who is now going to fight for a seat in the European Parliament.
Okay, both Brian and Cian covered a lot of the topics that we'll be fighting on and arguing for in Europe, but I just want to make one point before giving you the reason for why I'm standing.
Just hold on a second.
It's the far right, I'd say.
Yeah. Okay, sorry again.
I just want to make one political point on top of what my colleagues have said, and that is that people make history, and we talked about change and history, but we don't always do so in circumstances of our own choosing. And that's not Breed Smith saying that, that's the great Karl Marx once said that. But he's absolutely right. And we do want to make history, we do want to make the world a better, more equal and more safe and environmentally friendly place, but we're doing it in very, very difficult circumstances. And if you look across the world at the moment, we're not calling it a world war, but the world is at war. And in Europe in particular, there's a sort of a poly-crisis taking place. You have a crisis of the cost of living, the crisis of war, migration, environment, workers' rights. There's so many conflating things. But what I think is happening to the body politic is that it's going down silos. There's specialist interests in this, specialist interests in that, and no attempt to join the dots and to see that there's a knock-on effect for each of these things, one onto the other. And I'm really going to focus on trying to do that. And my main reason for trying to do that is to win ordinary people, your normal Joe Soap, everyday person, back into a space where they can be completely rational and they can try and interpret an irrational world in a way that will help them to act, to change it. And therefore, for me, that's one of the biggest challenges. Now, the reason I'm standing, because the last time I saw you all in the one room was when I said I'm not standing again. So I'm a complete contradiction. But I'm allowed, I'm a woman, it's my prerogative and all that jazz. It's not really that, it's that the members of People Before Profit, we've had a lot of discussion about the challenges we're facing. And of course, everyone's talking, this is an election year, 2024, there's the American election, there's billions of people across the planet are going to be running an election. So it's a big feature of what we're talking about lately. And we were always going to run somebody in the European elections in Dublin. And it became sort of kind of an obvious thing to say, well, Breed, why wouldn't you do it? It'll be a short campaign, you're well suited for it, you're well able to argue, and you have a media profile. And I had to sit on that over the Christmas and over the New Year, and eventually came back and said, you bastards, I'm going to do it. I'm only joking. I eventually came back and said, okay, so this does make sense, it's the right thing to do, and I'm willing to give it my best and to fight like hell to win the seat. So that's why I'm here. I'm open to questions from you, but I hope my political explanation throws some light on why I think it is absolutely crucial that socialist voices like ours are in this debate. The debate will be about migration, it will be about war, it will be about neutrality, and it will be about the cost of living and the extremities that the lads talked about, the wealthy versus the poor in the world. And I think it's very, very important that socialist voices are in that debate and really articulating something that will help, as I said at the beginning, ordinary people grapple with the very confusing, very irrational world that they're having to navigate and negotiate.
Thank you very much, Breed, and thanks on behalf of People Before Profit for agreeing to stand and give us a good chance of fighting for a seat in Dublin. Questions, Paul?
Breed, you mentioned that you're going to fight like hell for the seats, and I have no doubt about it. You talked about the platform that you had, which is part and parcel of what PPP is about. But I'm wondering, is there a consideration on the left that this is also a challenge to the sitting TD Claire Daly, who some people on the left felt that she campaigned in 2019 on one agenda and then acted on a different agenda once in the Parliament?
Well, I'm not trying to challenge Claire at all. I'm trying to challenge the establishment, and Claire is very happy for me to run, as in I have a right to do so. People Before Profit, as I say, we're going to field somebody. Now that we're fielding, and I'm going to say this with modesty, up front and centre, probably our best candidate with a chance to win. I don't see that there's any logic to saying why we shouldn't do that. And Claire and I talk, and we're very fraternal and supportive of each other, not on everything, on most things. And I will be, and I hope she will too, be trying to arrange it so that we advocate a second preference for each other.
Just also make the point that there was a poll which was conducted by Fine Gael and was leaked in the Irish, or was given to the Irish Independent, which indicates that there's currently 3 government seats in Dublin: Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Greens. The poll indicates that the Fine Gael seat is very much up for challenge, and the Green seat is very much up for challenge. And it suggests that it put us at 11.5% in Dublin, Clare Daly at 14.5% in Dublin, and it suggests that the fight is there for 2 left seats to be won in Dublin. It's definitely there. So that's why we think there's absolutely a logic in doing so. Anybody else?
Any questions?
Breed,
I was wondering when you'd come in.
Yeah. I think you're going to be a very credible candidate, Breed, and you have a long and distinguished career in politics. I'm just wondering though, did you really have no inkling when you told us you were resigning your Dáil seat that you wouldn't be going for Europe all that up?
I had absolutely no intention, said in hand on heart. I had no intention, because I wanted to, and I think I said it to you at the time, I really wanted to spend my time promoting Hazel. I think, in circumstances a bit less of our choosing, but I think she would stand a good chance if I was there backing her all the time. And actually, me and her being on the same leaflet will help a lot, because I'll be associated with her local campaign and she with mine.
So when did PPP come for you? Was it just before Christmas?
Yeah, just afterwards. Really, in response to the war in Gaza and how the world looked like it was increasingly becoming, like I tried to describe, in multiple ways, a more dangerous, complex place. And at the same time as we were getting an amazing response from ordinary people to the situation in Gaza, we were also getting the rise of the far right. So, we have to sit down and work these things out as well. But I think for ordinary people trying to figure them and work them and navigate them, it's really, really difficult. But I think it's all for to play for. And if you look last week in the north, 200,000 public sector workers came out on a pay strike. That is the working class. That is the diaspora that I want to represent. And they have every potential to fight back on their own behalf. It's just a very difficult space at the moment. But I actually genuinely had no intention of doing this. I think I said to you at the time, I want to build the climate movement. I want to focus on that, on the anti-racist movement.
And how will you feel though if you unseat your...
If I unseat Clare? I don't suppose I feel, terrible about it. That's life on the whole, isn't it? But it's not what I'm setting out to do. I think the way Paul put it in terms of how we can perceive an opportunity for the left to carry both seats. And by the way, this was said to me in 2016 and 2020, you're running against Joan Collins. That was never my intention. And in fact, we both got elected on both occasions.
Thanks a lot.
Breed, how will your campaign this time around differ to 2014? Are you going to approach it in a different way?
Yeah, well, I'm much better known now, and I get a lot of requests from the media, so I'll approach it in a different way, is right. But I do really want to drill down into this idea of the poly crisis in Europe and how that's playing out for people and what can be done. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not Euro-critical. We're very European Union critical, and have been. That was part of the 2014 campaign. Paul was always very good in that when he was out there in office, and Joe Higgins before him. But it's about saying that this could be a Europe for people, not profit, and it could be a Europe that opposes war and racism instead of feeding it. And that's the kind of tone we want to set.
And will spás an sin the Bert ó Netal Clay le hagad sé an seo sa Europe?
Ó credim go bhfuil spás an sin the Bert ó Netal Clay mar dearan na Pols go bhfuil agus tá an tam ceart chun argóid a choras cóna goilí go cámid Bert ó Netal Clay a choras Jacks Europe.
Everyone good?
Yeah.